Happy Halloween, everyone. How are we all doing? I have a little demo to show off to you guys. It's a little bit of a psychological horror, but all the worrying elements have been scrubbed out of the demo, so it should be good to go. Grab a drink, grab a plushie, settle in, and let's do this. It was a morning just like any other. That is to say, he was plagued with strange dreams that felt oddly realistic while experiencing them, but he easily recognized their ludicrous nature as soon as he became aware enough to open his eyes. And once he regained enough consciousness to realize his own reality, all thoughts of those dreams flew away in an instant, perhaps in horror of the monotonous daily grind that actually awaited him. He couldn't blame them, since he would run far away too if he could. The one crudely dubbed Azzypants woke up to the sound of an alarm clock screaming in his ears, signifying that it was time to rise and shine, to repeat the same old humdrum routine after yet another night of insufficient sleep. His night had been far from restful, broken up time and again with stupid spam messages flooding his inbox. He didn't even bother checking after the first couple pings, as his actual contacts were woefully low. And among them, there were still some like his father, who he left in there begrudgingly despite having no intention to speak to the man ever again. It was a wonder he even kept his cell phone, which as much of a headache as it caused him. It wasn't doing him any good. However, there was still a part of him that didn't want to give up the last lingering connection he had to his former best friend, who'd long since fled this crummy little town in search of his dreams. And Azzypants sincerely hoped the guy found them, despite also hoping Azrael would come back empty-handed, knocking on his door in a desperate need of comfort. Nah, it wasn't as if he wanted Azzy to be trapped in this hellscape with him. It was the opposite, in fact. He wished he was afforded the chance to chase his destiny right alongside him. But as much as Azrael always gave Pants special concessions, he feared that if he ever asked for a favor, he'd be bluntly denied and looked down upon for even mentioning it. All Azzypants could do was stand there and watch Azrael slink off to the unknown, vowing that he too would follow in those footsteps someday. But who was he kidding? He didn't have the means, the connections, or the luck necessary to gamble with his own livelihood. Folks here didn't exactly take kindly to him. He could only imagine being chewed up and spit out by the unfriendly, faceless masses that lived beyond this friendly, quaint little town's border. No, he needed to first find a purpose, some job, training, or occupation that would net him some initial security. Only then could he think about leaving, much less pursuing his own dreams. But therein lies the problem. As an outsider, he couldn't possibly weasel his way into a place he didn't belong. He couldn't grab hold of opportunities he couldn't see. Deep down, he knew he was too afraid to even try to risk yet another rejection, though he should have been used to it by now. Each new dismissal hurt just as much as the previous one. It was exhausting constantly trying to hype himself up enough to take yet another chance to immediately be turned away time after time. As if the whole world was in agreement that Azzypants just wasn't good enough no matter how hard he tried. And each travesty hammered in the point that everyone wanted him to give up trying, get out of their faces, and go die silently somewhere off screen. These days, it was getting harder and harder to fight back his resentfulness. The only one who gave him the confidence to push on despite the hardship had always been Azzy. And now, that guy was gone. Sighing, he took out his aggression on the phone in hand as punishment for lulling him out of his blissfully ignorant nightmares and slammed it back down against the bedside table. In doing so, however, the phone jerked with momentum and fell neatly between the crack that formed between the bed and the table. He was half tempted to leave the damn thing there, let it run out of battery, and never worry about it ever again. However, there seemed to be some severe weather event happening outside, and it wouldn't hurt to be cautious. At the very least, the phone could serve as a flashlight in dire situations. A faint voice whispered in his mind. I think, for the sake of this, we will pick up the phone. towards the dresser. To his relief, the phone was easy to find. Since he hadn't quite caught up with housekeeping, the other side of his bed was a mess. He feared that anything that had gone too deep under there had been lost for good. Since he was already out of bed, there was no sense in delaying the inevitable. He threw off his battle-stained white undershirt and searched inside the drawer for a fresh change of clothes. It was filled with copies of the same nauseatingly cheese-scented bright red and yellow polyester uniforms he wore for work. If he had the choice, he'd wear something a lot less flammable around the oven. But at least it wasn't as embarrassing as the costume he had to wear for his previous line of work. Azzypants shuddered just thinking about it. There were very few opportunities for employment in this town, and he pretty much worked his way down the list of possible contenders. Like it or not, food service was his last resort. He had rent and a car note he couldn't neglect. Therefore, it was imperative for him to keep his current job despite the fact that his manager kept refusing to pay him a seniority raise. He was Employee of the Month every single month. That should at least count for something. Or maybe not, considering who his co-workers were. Pants walked into the shower room, not quite ready to look at the haggard face that would stare back at him through the mirror. Sometimes he was afraid of what he would see. He couldn't blame the others who made mean comments about his appearance. He wasn't exactly the most well put together, but not for a lack of trying. No matter how much he groomed and trimmed himself up, he always had the same tired expression in his eyes, as if the light in his soul was burning out painfully slowly. Because he was ugly, people basically assumed that he was also lazy and unhygienic. And as such, he spent an inordinate amount of time in the morning combing his fur and beard into sleek spikes, making sure everything was just so in order to prove them wrong. Though the heat and slog of the long hours he worked did quick work of undoing everything, especially since he was forced to wear a hat for sanitation reasons. Which one? Just look at yourself, you hideous sack of shit. How can you expect anyone to take you seriously when you can't even meet your own gaze? You look as if you'd rightfully been kicked down a flight of stairs. Well, what's stopping you from making that jump? It's not like your freshly mangled corpse would be any harder to look at. You'd be doing the world a favor. One less eyesore to mar this shitty town. Nobody loves you. Nobody would miss you. In spite of everything, you're all alone. And you'll always be alone because you're worthless. Nobody would even notice you bit the dust. No one except work. Angel knows those incompetent fools don't know how to do their shit properly. Your only purpose in this life is to be used as toilet paper, wiping up everyone else's messes. What a crappy role you play. But your audience demands a show. And just who are you to keep them waiting? Azzypants walked to the entryway, throwing on his shoes before grabbing the hat off the coat rack. Of course, none of the decor was of his own choosing. It was all passed down to him with the apartment, and he felt as if it would be a sin to move it all after these years. To move it after all these years. Though he had to admit, it did feel a little silly to have this kind of furniture and never use it, so he purposely kept an old pair of sneakers nestled in the shoe rack. Those were one of the very few childhood remnants that he kept throughout the years. Not a particularly impressive brand of shoes, mind you. They were the typical bargain bin fare of the local supermarket his mom frequented. However, he couldn't help but smile looking at them. Back when he was still in school, that damn dreamer kid kept pestering him to join some extracurricular activities. And while Pants was eventually worn down and tried out just to get Azrael off his back, he was kicked out of the club for his less than stellar athletic capabilities. Why is that so hard to say? That should have been that, but as he still swung by every once in a while to chat after practice. And one day, that kid strode up to his door in a huff, frazzled because the coach decided to enforce the strict uniform policy after one of the girls took a little bit too much liberty with the length of her shorts. That alone made Pizza Pants regret being kicked out so hastily. Regardless, his friend had been quite upset, since that meant he would have to be forced to wear sneakers, and apparently he'd somehow never worn a single pair in his life. So Pants lent him these to help Azriel get acclimated. To no avail. The kid could hardly walk, much less run with those shoes on. He kept wobbling on his feet and falling every which way. It was actually quite cathartic to watch. Azzy was known to be quite a goody two-shoes around town, but when the shoes were on his own feet, he'd fall on top of Pizza Pants and uncharacteristically curse up a storm. Pants couldn't help but soften up to that kid after that. It hadn't been much longer that, in typical Azriel fashion, he got his way by presenting the coach with an argument that enforcing sneakers was discrimination against students who didn't have feet. And he was an eloquent enough speaker that it was never questioned again. Since that guy had no need to borrow Pants' shoes anymore, he simply returned them. And Pants, having another guy's foot sweat soak into his sneakers, decided it was best he avoided using them too. So here they sat, collecting dust. Since he couldn't bear to get rid of them, they served as a decoration reminding him of a much simpler time. Maybe one day, he could pass these sneakers on to his own kids, brag about how Azriel Dreamer once wore that pair in his youth. Until then, it was merely a placeholder in an uncomfortable empty doorway. Having sufficiently prepared, Pizza Pants swiftly made his way out the door and into the bustling morning that was already awaiting him. Even though Pants had known there would be some ugly weather outside, he sure wasn't expecting this. Not only was it still dark, there was fog blowing every which way. Normally, he would have just walked to work, but he could just feel it in his bones that everyone would call in for delivery today. Busy bastards. So he got into his car and made the short ride over. Thankfully, his inability to see what was in front of him wasn't much of a detriment. Work was just a straight shot down the road. He remembered there was a stop sign close by the bar, and since those flashing neon lights hadn't been turned off last night, they just barely cut through the fog, giving Pants a sense of his surroundings. He briefly stopped where he assumed the intersection to be, hoping that there weren't any cars on the road. Turn the corner. Pizza Pants had no idea why he turned the corner. It must have been a gut impulse brought on by habit. Nevertheless, it wasn't a big deal. He could just drive to the end of the next street and turn around. If he got lost, he could always look for the bar's neon signs. Hell, while he was at it, he should just call it a day, wander in, and order a couple beers. Wouldn't that be great? Calling in for a rainy day? But Pants wasn't that kind of person. He was the only one who took that job seriously. No doubt the other chuckle fucks probably wouldn't bother to show. Yeah, working wasn't too bad when he had the store to himself. At least he would earn a day's wage. Pants kept driving further and further, getting nervous when there was no end to the road in sight. It was such a small town. There was no possible way he could get lost. Even if he ended up on the highway, he'd have to turn eventually. However, time began to lose all meaning. It felt like an eternity of driving had passed, and still no sign of anything. Getting a bad feeling, Pants slowed down and turned the car around. He just had to go back the way he came, look for the lights. It wasn't that hard. It should be easy to do. Where the hell was he? A shadow flashed before his eyes. Pants' foot jerked over the brake, but it was far too late. Whatever it was moved across the road far too quickly. And thank God, he could have hit that thing, that person. He could have been a murderer. Pizza Pants started shaking pretty badly, his nerves catching up with him. He wanted to go home. He wanted to forget about work and go straight to bed. Nothing was worth the irreparable devastation that almost occurred. His car slowed down to a crawl, and Pants craned his neck, hoping to see any sign of light. He could just find the bar. He could go back home and call in sick. Vacation days be damned. Screw the consequences. He desperately needed a vacation at this very minute, a moment of calm to clear his head. He started to sweat, and his uniform became uncomfortably itchy. The stress of it all must have caught up with his brain. He'd rather be anywhere but here, in his car, on the road that seemed to be going nowhere. He kept driving and driving, but nothing ever changed. It's just like his life. No matter what he did, he never ended up going anywhere. He needed to get out. He needed to pull over, stop the car, and search on foot. He knew everyone that lived here. Surely there was somebody that could help him out. Just seeing a familiar face at this point would be comforting. Anything to not be on the road he was heading down. Anything was better. Anything but... Before he knew it, he was standing in front of the entrance to the pizzeria. He must have relied on his instincts to take him here. Maybe he should try going back to therapy after this whole incident. He didn't seem to be doing too hot after all. Dance break! Excuse me, but I was already performing in my opening duties before your show. I was performing them. I missed! The body language, the face, the voice, that face, the theatrical affectation, and especially that face? My very shackles being released! Please don't release your shackles in the dining room. Did you just approach? My, how forward of you! I didn't approach. No! Feel free to dial me up anytime, sweetie. Not only an eclipse, but rain? What a freaking day. No wonder everyone had gone loony. Don't tell me you're thinking of giving in already. That voice! That voice that I didn't do! What brought you back to this dump? Hazard let out a small laugh. The melody it carried gracing Pants' ears and filling his heart with ease. Fuck, it had been so long since he heard that angelic timbre. I forgot Azrael's a boy. Azzy, you horns! Azrael gave him a bright, genuine smile. It's your imagination. And that's all there really is. There are, of course, choices that I didn't take. There are definitely some more enemies, and some more things to check out. I don't know if this is going to be a completed project, but that's all there is for now. And, we'll see what the future holds. Alright, good night, everyone!